Well, congrats on the new album.
Thank you.
Does it come with a sense of relief that it's finally come to fruition?
Yeah, wow, if people could only be flying on the wall and see where it started, I mean, we'll see where we were like 2 years ago, you know, it's like you take apart something, and when I was a kid I used to take watches apart and never be able to put them back together again. You're just taking it apart, and it's kind of like that with this record. We took the band apart, and then we were having trouble putting it back together again, and that's when Chris Goss came in, and he said, these habits you've had for a while, we're going to get rid of this, you don't need this. I'm going to bring in some things, a couple of chords, arrangement ideas, very simple things, but very important, transitional chords, some arrangement stuff, and you know, we're doing the capsules, which were like these EPs we did through 2010, and we did 2 of those, and Chris came up with a song called Embers, and Embers has a lot of space in it, it's quite cinematic. That was a really important thing. There's all this brevity and space in the music now, and a lot of air in the music, you know, so that was a really important aspect, and then we started to get some new good habits, and within that we were able to apply that to the songs that were coming up, and now we're at where we're at. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Capsule, you had announced in 2009 that you would prefer to release your music in chunks, and thus the 2 EPs for Capsule 1 and 2.
Yeah.
As you said, you didn't want to do another album given that it had become a dead format.
Yeah.
So what caused you to change your mind for them?
When people heard the capsules, they were like, where's the rest of it? We want an album. Like hardcore, dyed-in-the-wool cult fans were like, we can't wait for more. We want it right now, you're teasing us. So there's that element. Then it was like labels started banging on the door because they heard what we're doing, going, this is really good. This is really strong songs. And then from the inside of the band, we're going like, we don't want to be a label. So we're trying to market our own music and do all that. We're going, we don't want to do this. We didn't have the infrastructure. So it was a learning curve. We were doing, again, the cult, very typical, doing it right out there in public where everybody can see, you know, working through kind of learning to be our own label and everything. So it's not something we really wanted to do, and because we're constantly touring and working, doing other things, I'm doing film, and you know, we decided that everybody was looking at me, saying it's your call. So I just capitulated. I was like, okay, fine. But there was part of me that was kind of like, I think relieved in the sense that we had this material sitting there, and I really wanted to get it out. It just had to come out. It had to come out at a certain time because these songs had a certain energy that possibly if they were left longer, that would not be as relevant, possibly for me. And they're still fresh. They're, you know, some of the wounds that went into these songs are just healing. So I'm just kind of re-entering the world at the place where feeling strong, and it's very close to the source, you know. So that's a great thing, and it's, as a body of work, I think it's cohesive. It's, you know, it's integrated.
Well, you speak of wounds.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for the majority of these songs?
Wow, I can take it all the way back to living in Hamilton, being treated as a third-class citizen, you know, coming to Canada as an immigrant, and you know, being ostracized straight away. You know?
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Some kids were really cool. It was like, yeah, cool, that's great. You know, there was so many cultural differences, like the way we dressed, the music I liked, even at like 11, 12 years of age. So I was kind of ostracized from the main group of kids at school. I was an outsider, an immigrant. So my kind of kids I ran around with were the indigenous kids in my school. They were on the outside. They didn't fit in with the mainstream, the culture of school. And then other immigrant kids, like I had a friend that came from Jamaica, came to school the first day with no shoes on. And it was snowing, and people were laughing at him. And I was like, he's my buddy. We hung out, and I really liked him. You know, we were friends, and so you kind of get, you know how kids are. You get branded into a certain social group at school, and you stay there, and I stayed there. So that was my crew, and that's who I ran with, and that's, you know, and that really set the tone. But then I went through that in Britain as well. When I was English and I went to Scotland, I was, you know, I between England and Scotland in that period of time was pretty harsh.
Really?
Tribal divisions, yeah. You know, and then you go back to Scotland from England, you pick up a bit of Scottish accent, and then I'm like, I'm a Scotsman, a Scots kid. I get nicknamed Haggis, and then I'm in a different social group there. So I've always been pushed into the outside. I've always been a new kid at school. But that comes with a certain thing, and then you find things to identify with in the culture. So I was more drawn to, initially, something like David Bowie, for example. You know, it was like I was more drawn to that. Somebody who was like very overtly pushing it further than the conservative, middle-of-the-road culture. And when I saw Bowie and Ziggy Stardust, I was like, that's my leader. You know, even at like 11 years old or whatever it was, I understood there was something really profoundly different about what he was doing compared to everybody else, and that was it. So that was my real musical, love affair began right there, and I stayed there.
Do you think you decided right then and there, that's what I want to do?
No, that's not what I wanted. There wasn't so much that's what I wanted to do. That's what I identified with. I mean, I got thrown out of school for having blue food coloring in my hair at like 10 or 11 years old, because I was emulating his look.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my friends said, well, you can get your hair that colour if you use food colouring. So I put it in. It was actually before school. I put it in and came out the kids' bathroom at school, and I'm like, in the class sitting there, and I got this blue streak in my hair. I mean, it wasn't very well done, but still in there. The teacher's like, outraged, go home and wash that out. So I got thrown out. I got thrown out of school for dancing on the table to musical appreciation. I was kind of like slightly introverted, but then had moments of extrovert, and maybe it was fueled by things like seeing Top of the Pops and definitely Bowie perform, and that was just in me. So it was always, I had that, and when punk rock came along, then it's like the possibilities of being able to be a musician or an artist all of a sudden became something that was a lot closer to a possibility. So I was in the punk rock community, and people would there'd always be somebody who had a guitar lying around or whatever, and try and emulate. Sex Pistols songs weren't that difficult to play, so you'd always be in places where people would pick it up and jam Sex Pistols songs, and pretty much knew all the words to the Pistols songs. And I found myself one day being asked by these guys if I'd like to join their band because they liked the way I looked and thought I'd be a good lead singer, and so I went out and tried out for this band. We were called Violation, and they ended up becoming some deathcore. And that was my audition, was singing Sex Pistols songs. So like, I sang about 2 songs, I go, great, do you want the job? I'm like, okay. But I didn't actively seek being in a band. I kind of asked, I fell into it. Kind of fell into it. I mean, I was on the fringes of going to art school. I was going to go to Bradford Art College, which is where David Hockney went. And I went there and they looked at my portfolio and said, you're too lazy, there's not enough work in here. I'm going, well, not enough work. And said, oh yeah, you need way more work. Your portfolio's thin. He said, it's good, it's promising, but it's thin. I was like, but I want to hang out with my friends and play music, and that's what I wanted to do. So I think it was an easier option than being a fine artist.
Well, there was a time when I considered cult like quintessential rock radio.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering what you consider to be the current rock radio, and where your new stuff is going to fit into that.
Well, in terms of rock radio, it seems to be, in a cul-de-sac in some ways. It seems to be a shrinking demographic. There's certainly plenty of guys out there playing guitars, but it's almost they've lost the connection between the roots of it, which is very blues orientated, that sort of sensuality in the music, and now it's become more kind of coming from the neck up. The sensuality's kind of gone out of the music. And I think because it's become slightly more stiffer and testosteronic, it's the feminine element's gone out of it, sexual element's gone out of it.
Yeah.
So you can't survive. It's impossible. You have to have the feminine element. You got to have both elements. So in terms of the cult, I mean, we get played everywhere. I mean, we get played at postmodern, we get played at, you know, rock, hard rock, we get played all over the place. But I think in some ways the rock community claims the band because we're all probably one of the few bands that have maybe an awareness of that in our music. There's a balance of, you know, erudition in terms of like aspiring to certain, you know, certain space in terms of lyrical imagery and then also just raw primal riffs, guitars, that kind of energy, and then things like the rhythm. The rhythm for me is essential. I mean, I got asked the other day, a guy said, what do you listen to first? What do you go first? He goes to the melody, he goes to the rhythm. I said, rhythm straight away. Bang, it's got to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there's not a drum present, you can feel the cadence of the way somebody plays. Like Leonard Cohen, for example, you don't really hear drums on Leonard Cohen records, but the way he moves, you know he's moving. There's something going on. He's caressing a woman in all of his songs, and you feel that. And it doesn't matter that he's playing it like, you know, 80,000 decibels or whatever, you know, if a fully amp or you're playing the acoustic guitar, you can tell there's a sensual element to it. And that's kind of, it's like everyone just goes, you know, straight to the target. There's no journey, and, you know, and those subtleties, we lose that. And that's what makes great art, is the textures, the layers, you know, that kind of awareness in the music. So I'm pretty proud that we kind of made a record like we made, especially the Station of Life. Most bands, guys have been around as long as we have, are kind of,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, they've already picked out the retirement homes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've all moved to the desert or Florida or wherever, and they're done.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. I mean, in many ways, for me, I personally feel I'm just getting ready to get into some stuff because I feel that my writing is getting better, and now I'm really anxious to kind of try that out, push it further. What it was in that, you know, when I was a kid, it was completely different. A lot of it was about performance. I mean, it was just raw energy. I couldn't stand still, you know. And maybe playing with Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger, they showed me the importance of, like, you nail your feet to the floor and you really become a channel for this. You know, you've got to kind of really go inside and get into the space of it and the subtext and really get in there. And then I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be inside of this, you know, this kind of body of work. And I think it brought some of that back to the Colton's gone like, no, we've got to like get it on the leash and do this. These are subtle inflections, but very important part of our growth. So, yeah.
So what was it about working with Bob Rock that you decided to bring him back on again for this project?
Bob, we had a long relationship with Bob, obviously. Fourth record with Bob. We started with Chris Goss. Like I said, Chris got really created the scope and the breadth and the subtext and all the raw elements, and he really helped to get it to a certain stage, and we really needed to finish the record, and we kind of exhausted the relationship with Chris, and the chemistry was, I mean, it was great. I mean, I love Chris, he's one of my best friends, so, but within the band we kind of hit this place where it kind of stuck in the mud, and we really needed to finish it. We need to inject some fresh energy, and there's a different kind of sentiment. And Bob, you know, very graciously accepted. You know, I mean, I thought there was only one person in the world who could help us finish this record. That was Bob, and he came in and very graciously came in. He's working with somebody else's, essentially somebody else's work, but he was very reverential of Chris. But then he added so many other things to it. He said to maybe taught different interpretations of things, refining it more, production values, arrangements, other parts, counterparts, counter melodies. In some places where there was one vocal, we might put three to make it sound a certain way. Very subtle things in some places. And then some very overt things, you know, some of the arrangements really got changed between Chris's interpretation and Bob's interpretation. So,
But you're comfortable working with him after all this time?
Bob's incredible. He's like, you know, he's like a big brother, so he's not that much older than us, but I look up to him, you know, he's made some incredible records. And at this stage of Bob's career, he really doesn't need to come in and work with us, you know. He's still making platinum records with so many artists, and has incredible success. So he was the only person who knew us intimately enough to come in and say, you know, this is brilliant, but try it this way. And like the song on the album called Life is Greater Than Death, and he brought in a piano player and some other elements to really enhance this song and really took it to another level. So it was kind of like off-Broadway. It was like this really incredible, you know, it was in much more of an ad hoc place, and then it came onto Broadway, finessed, refined, without kind of losing, you know, the raw ingredients, because they're still very evident on this record. There's still a lot of stuff that's not polished. I mean, a lot of people say, well, Bob Rock's going to polish the whole thing up, and I was like, well, actually he didn't. He knew what to leave raw. You know, it's like an architect that comes in and goes, well, that concrete pillar is going to stay the way it is, but this wall, we're going to change it. So he really came in as an architect. And then you look at people like, you know, U2, the fact they worked with my God, they worked with, last album they worked with Eno, Lanois, you know, Steve Lillywhite, Flood, I think, on some tracks, Will I Am, Rick Rubin initially. So many producers come in. So it's the first time that we worked with several, you know, two producers on the same record, and it was actually a really cool process. So that's something I'd actually like to do it again. You know, if they were both up for it, I'd love to do it again. But maybe if we were to do that, maybe we'd split material and say this is Goss material, this is Bob Rock material. You know, give them that kind of brief. But one can only dream. We'll see.
Well, you just mentioned Rick Rubin.
Yes.
So that brings up this question then.
Yes.
After the Love album was kind of psychedelic rock.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it came time to make Electric, it was already nailed down, and yet you brought in Rick Rubin and essentially re-recorded it. Was that because the cult was looking for a different sound, or because you were looking to fit in with what was happening at the time? Because the Love album didn't really break you stateside like Electric did.
But what was happening at the time was kind of, the hard rock movement was more like the new wave of British heavy metal. It was a different kind of rock scene. I mean, Metallica were just kind of getting going at that time as well, but we hadn't really heard of them. I mean, we were really still in a kind of a postmodern world. You know, we're still in the fallout of punk rock and new wave. It was still in that kind of space. And the things that we were discovering that we loved were like the Doors, Led Zeppelin, you know, even things like, you know, some of the hard rock guitar playing of Mick Ronson, you know, Bowie period, Mick Ronson period Bowie, and even the Stones, and we were trying to incorporate that into our music. I mean, you know, the Love album was as much influenced by Satanic Majesty's request as it was by, you know, possibly the Stooges, Wild Wiles and Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. But with Rick Rubin, it was, we'd been touring. We'd already been at it for like 4 or 5 years, and we were still babes. I mean, we were like 24, 25, and we were still kids. So most bands don't start until they're 30, I don't think. There's a lot of 30-year-olds out there in bands. So we came to New York, and actually Chris Sheppard at the time had played. We were in a club in Toronto, maybe in, I don't know, maybe 85 or something, and I heard Chris Sheppard playing a Beastie Boys track, Cookie Puss. And I said, what's that? And he's like, it's Beastie Boys. And I said, who produced it? He said, Rick Rubin. And I like, immediately like, said to Billy, said, that's how we should be produced. We've got to strip it right back and get a breakbeat on that. And so,
thus the rewrite and the re-record.
Yeah, well, actually what happened was, that was the initial hearing through Chris playing the track in the club. And then we went ahead with Steve Brown, but even when we were doing it, I knew it didn't feel right. And I was always thinking about Rick Rubin, we should get Rick Rubin. So we went through that, and eventually what was going to happen was Rick Rubin was going to remix that record. And Rick was like, I'll remix it and we'll do 2 new tracks or something like that. And we're like, okay, cool, great. So we came to New York, and we met with Rick in New York. Previously to that, I think we were over for the CMJ Awards or the College of Music Journalist Awards. And at the same time we met Rick, and I think he was still in his dorm room at NYU, and Def Jam was a fledgling company, it was just coming up.
Wow. And
that's when we met him, pre-Run DMC, pre all that. So Rick's like playing this Blue Cheer video, saying like, this is what you guys should be doing, something like that. And we're like, oh, what? That's so cool. And it was just raw, and we were like, yeah, that's what we want to do. And but we didn't get together with him until like, I don't know, later in that year, '86. We initially went in the studio and Rick says, let's try this. And we go, okay, so we're trying songs in a different way, and the next thing now we've got backing tracks for we've actually done re-recording. We're supposed to be in there remixing, so the management come over from the UK expecting to hear remixed what the brief was. We were playing the backing tracks. We said we've re-recorded the whole record, and then we're like, you've done what?
Especially after the money that was already laid out.
Electric Ladyland in New York City, you know how expensive. That's why I still haven't received a royalty from Beggar's Banquet, because we spent it all on making those records. And I didn't care about that. It was really about what was coming out. So I had no idea how much these things cost. I had no idea. I had no idea that we were like goofing off, drinking beer and eating pizza and playing pool. I had no idea we were being charged for the hour. We're hanging out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Electric Lady was a clubhouse. It was a clubhouse for wherever Rick went. George Rakulis was there, and you know those guys. I mean, of course, everybody was associated with Def Jam would come through and hang out, because that's where Rick was. So they'd all hang out there. So everybody from Beastie Boys to Run DMC to Slayer to whoever was hanging out.
Wow.
I met LL Cool J when he was like 19. And he was just a kid. He's like, oh, nice to meet you. Kidding me? See the guy now? He's like, yeah. So it was an amazing time, and yeah, it's like Rick was very kind of like, you know what, I'm going to strip this right down. I'm going to take all that kind of, his vernacular was kind of a little bit different, but going to get rid of all that kind of airy-fairy, postmodern, British, new age, get rid of all that. Oh, so that's just, no, that's awful. It's like AC/DC, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. This is your food group that you should be eating from.
Okay, Love Removal Machine.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, that's like, you know, it's a stonking blues riff, so, you know, you get those songs, and it's a completely different mindset. I don't think we could never replicate that period. It's impossible. Even if we went in the same studio with Rick Rubin and George Rakulis and the entire ensemble, we could not recreate it because we're in a different place.
We are.
Yeah.
Which brings me to, I was watching the video. It's a pretty bleak picture of what it's like for youth today.
Yeah, totally.
And so it made me think about videos back in, say, the heyday of the 80s, you know, and how it was all about, most of the videos were live footage and all about fun and partying. And you look at videos today, and it paints a much darker picture. Do you think it was easier for bands back then to make music when it was all about fun, or just the tougher times bring out something better?
I think the generations have inherited a pretty harsh world. And if anything, young people, it's to their credit, are really taking on the responsibility of trying to balance things out, while the adults are flailing and just falling. I mean, politicians have no solution for anything.
Right.
For the most part. I mean, there are definitely some enlightened politicians out there who have always been, you know, probably in the fringes, but in terms of, you know, youth culture, I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old as well, so I watch them and I watch the world that they're moving into. And you walk into a world that's like, especially the way things are cut up in the arts, you know, there's certain divisional lines drawn. There's no encouragement of young artists. It's really about profit, immediate, extract the youth, you know, extract that kind of the essence that youth has, and immediately go straight into the machine. It's marketed, it's commodified, and it's thrown back. And you know, when you see like 60s and 70-year-olds with their faces pinned back to their ears, trying to fit into dresses they wore and outfits they wore when they were 17, you know, with the fake tans and the veneered teeth and the Botox and all of that. Everybody's desperately trying to hang on to the youth. And the kids have come along, and what they're seeing is this dystopian wilderness. I mean, they are turning on you know, their computers and seeing images of like, you know, pollution and urban squalor, and you know, they're not blind to it. I mean, kids are exposed to things like drugs, pornography, probably a lot earlier age than we were.
Definitely.
I mean, the kind of porn that we saw when we were kids were like, you know, it might be something like Razzle or something in the back if somebody left a magazine, you know, something quite titillating, you know, but not now. I mean, kids are used to like seeing harder stuff, and drugs and are more available, and the culture's harder, you know, what's reflected in the arts and the music. Hip-hop culture's pretty, you know, in some places pretty brutal.
Mm-hmm.
So, very quickly, you know, this is what generation are getting for their education. Yeah, absolutely, there's things like, there's a more erudite movement, you know, postmodern kind of movement with artists who are trying to do something more elevated and cultivated. But even they're coming up against a resistance, you know, that, well, how do you get your music out there? How do you get to be seen? And it's kind of a tough time. So the 80s was like MTV and Much Music, and it was very highly, you know, the camera's in front of you and it's like, and go. And
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like that for a while. But then again, you know, we also, we saw the cracks appear, you know, some with Seattle, when Seattle came up, and what was being pointed out in the culture then. You know, that there was maybe the beginning of this kind of, we've been at war for 20 years. You know, the environment seems to be getting worse, not better, and the generation came along and said, party's over.
Mm-hmm.
This is really what our experience is. You know, let us in. And so with the video, we just wanted to reflect, you know, I chose a young woman as well because I think that young women seem to be becoming more, you know, predominant in the culture, like Hunger Games, for example, or Girl with Dragon Tattoo, or Hannah. These, you know, in the film culture, you see these strong young women who are like, they're the ones that are grabbing the weapons. They're the ones that are going out in the front line and going like, you know what, get out of the way, I'm going to take care of this. So you're seeing more and more heroines come forward. Seeing more women in government, in positions of power. It's really interesting. The women are coming out now and going like, you know what, thank you very much. We're going to take care of this. Because you guys have no idea what you're doing. So the women are finding the power again, and that's pretty exciting, I think. You know, I mean, being a guy, it's like, you see these scientific things where they say, oh yeah, well actually, women could go forward. They don't actually need the male to reproduce. You know, you're actually not needed. So, and I think that's another thing, the hard thing for guys. It's like, where do we sit in the culture?
Right.
You know, what are our role models? Really? This is WWF. There's some stuff out there that's pretty, some howlers out there. You know, look at GQ magazine, Johnny Squirrel with the short greased back hair. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio, that kind of thing. It's like, oh no. So, you know, you got all these guys running around with beards and, you know, don't know what the hell's going on.
I've just been given the wrap-up signal, so I've got
Sure.
2 quick questions then for
Okay.
you. Number 1, where did all of the Native Indian influences come for you?
Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah?
Like I said, you know, going to school with Indigenous kids. That was my group, my peer group. So being exposed to Indigenous culture at school, and then just having a fascination for a culture. I mean, you know, coming from the UK, I'd only ever seen Indigenous people poorly represented in bad westerns. And then I come to North America and I didn't realize how rich their culture was. So being exposed to that and having an inquisitive mind and kind of being ostracized from the main social group, that's what was interesting to me and really resonated with me. And the further I went into it, the deeper I got into it, the more I read, the more I experienced, you know, going out to Six Nations often, and that's just stayed with me.
Even all the images that you showed at Massey Hall, the show when you did the Love album back to front, I was at that show. Best show I saw that year. And I noticed even all the imagery was still, you know, there like it was before.
A lot of it's, you know, archetypal as well. It's, we depended on the planet for our existence. So these are, you know, motifs coming out of nature and out of wilderness. So they're ingrained in our DNA and our psyches. And when you bring up those images, they really resonate with the accent. You know, Rolex watches and a girl slipping champagne out of a shoe, or whatever that is.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah, but you put a wolf up there, or a forest, or a mountain, or, you know, something very strong, and people really, that really resonates. In fact, it enhances, you know, doesn't just grab people on one level. It seems to be, really fills people up, and you can see that, feel it. I mean, it certainly gets me. If I put red paint on my face, something happens. Immediately I'm into a different mindset. You know, and I do that occasionally. Sometimes I just take red paint, just come on in an encore, and I'm just in that space, and people just go, you know, shutting the band like words. It gets you out of that kind of common pedestrian consciousness. All of a sudden you're into ritual space, and in ritual space you're connected to transcendence, and when we go to transcendence we can't even articulate it, and that's what I'm alluding to. It's like, we're in a place where we have to get into transcendence. This whole material thing, look where we are. And it's only been 150 years of revolution. So you do the math, you know.
It's funny, I was just talking about that the other day.
Yeah, do the math. We better connect very quickly with indigenous culture, Tibetan culture. They don't need our help, we need their help.
Definitely.
We better go start knocking on some elders' doors and asking for a little bit. So, can you tell us how this works? Because we're not doing that good. You know?
And finally,
Yeah.
if you could go back to, say, 1985 and give yourself one piece of advice,
Yeah.
what would it be?
1985. I'd say you're okay. I'd really say to that kid, you're okay. Because that kid had no self-confidence whatsoever.
Really?
Zero.
The way you strutted on stage and there was no self-confidence.
Something about the stage was different though. The stage was kind of like, moving into that space was one thing, and there was just, I felt very, I don't know, I just felt free in that environment, but when I come off stage,
Really?
yeah, totally.
Yeah, that blows me away.
That's
I
when
never would have thought.
but then you have to deal with a completely different social situation. Then you're in a social environment. You know, you're in an environment where you're interacting with people and society, and that was a place where I had a very difficult time, you know. And then being objectified as well. Didn't know where people were coming from, what their angle was, and, you know, having kind of like poor, maybe a sense of esteem, or, you know, for a while it was very, very difficult to navigate that. Plus with the critical stuff, especially stuff coming from the UK, I was just like, these are the magazines and the newspapers that I grew up with. I grew up with The Enemy, I grew up with The Melody Maker, I grew up with Sounds, and these were for me, you know, really important. This is where, in a way, I connected with a lot of my artists. I would love it, and now they were turning against me. This is what I grew up with. So again, it was the ostracized, you know. So it's very difficult. And then, but you come to North America, and people were far more optimistic and a lot more. I was like, yeah, sure, come here. You guys are great. We love you guys. But yeah, I'd probably give the kid a pat on the shoulder and go, you know, you're okay. It's cool.
I think we'd all like to give the kid a pat on the shoulder too.
Yeah. But now it's different. Look at the guy on the cover of this album. You know.
Yeah.
Gloves are off.
Yeah. It's quite a
I mean, I could really kick off, but
shocking cover.
I have to keep myself on the leash. I mean, I get grabbed by the collar a lot, because when I get fired up, I'm going straight for the jugular, and I'm not, no holds barred. And the idea of being an entertainer and keeping it on a leash and just being like politically correct, and I mean, Bono's been, you know, he's had a good run at it. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to jump in there too, because I've got, you know, now I've got the experience and the credentials, and there's things I want to say and at this time in my life, and I want to share them, and this is the perfect vehicle for them. So.
Well, we want to thank you very, very much, Ian.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate it.
You're welcome.